Tasting. Lyon, September 1889. Herr Friedrich Thyssen is on holiday in France. He often goes on holiday in France in the autumn, as he is a great lover of wine. He picks a region and roams the countryside for a week, or perhaps two, visiting vineyards and collecting bottles of pleasing vintage to be shipped back to Munich. Herr Thyssen is friendly with several French winemakers and has made clocks for many of them. He visits one such winemaker on this particular trip to pay his respects and sample the latest bottles. Over a glass of Burgundy, the winemaker suggests that Friedrich might enjoy the circus that is in town, set up in a field a few miles away. A rather unusual circus, only open at night. But it is the clock, the elaborate black and white clock situated just inside the gates, that the winemaker thinks might particularly interest Herr Thyssen. "Reminds me of your work," the winemaker says, gesturing with his glass to the clock on the wall above the bar, shaped like a cascading bunch of grapes that tumble into a wine bottle that fills with wine as the hands on its label, an exact replica of the vineyard's label ticked by the seconds. Herr Thyssen is intrigued, and after an early dinner, he puts on his hat and gloves and begins walking in the general direction his winemaker friend had indicated. It is not difficult to locate his destination, as several townspeople are walking in the same direction, and once they pass out of town and into the fields, the circus cannot be missed. It glows. That is Herr Friedrich Thyssen's first impression of Le Cirque de Rêve, seen from half a mile away, and before he even knows its name. He walks towards it on this chilly evening through the French countryside like a moth to a flame. There is a considerable crowd outside when Herr Thyssen finally reaches the gates, and despite the crowd he would have spotted his clock instantly, even without having been informed of its placement. It looms across from the ticket booth, just inside the large iron gates. It is about to strike 7 o'clock, and he stands back to watch it, letting the line for tickets pass in front of him as the harlequin juggler pulls out a 7th ball from thin air, as the dragon's tail twitches and the clock chimes 7 quiet chimes, barely audible over the din of the circus. Herr Thyssen is pleased. The clock appears to be in perfect working order, and has obviously been well taken care of, despite being left out in the elements. He wonders if it might need a stronger varnish, and he wishes he had been informed that it would be used out of doors when he was constructing it, though it looks none of the worse for wear. He keeps his eyes on it as he waits in line, wondering if he should try to contact Mr. Barres about the matter, if he still has the London address in his files back in Munich. When it is his turn, he gives the posted amount of francs to the ticket seller, a young woman in a black dress and long white gloves, looking more prepared for an elegant evening at the opera than for a night selling tickets at a circus. As she pulls out a ticket, he inquires, first in French, then in English when she does not catch his meaning, if she might know whom he could contact about the clock. She does not reply, but her eyes light up when he identifies himself as the person responsible for its construction. She returns his francs with his ticket, despite his protestations, and after rummaging through a small box, she produces a business card which she hands him as well. Herr Thyssen thanks her, moving out of line and off to the side, inspecting the card. It is a high-quality card on heavy stock, a black background embossed with silver. Le Cirque de Rêve, Chandler Christopher Lefebvre, proprietor. The back has an address in London. Herr Thyssen places it in his coat pocket, along with his ticket and his saved francs, and takes his first steps into the circus. He begins by simply wandering, casually investigating the odd home of his Wunschtraum clock. Perhaps because of the months he spent absorbed in working on the clock itself, the circus feels familiar, comfortable. The monochromatic color scheme, the endless circles of pathways like clockworks. Herr Thyssen is amazed at how well his clock fits the circus, and how well the circus fits his clock. He enters only a fraction of the tents that first night, stopping to watch fire breathers and sword dancers, sampling a very fine S-vine in a tent marked "Drinkery, mature visitors only." When he inquires about it, the bartender, the only person in the circus that Friedrich encounters who speaks when spoken to, albeit minimally, informs him that it is a Canadian wine and notes the vintage for him. By the time Herr Thiessen departs the circus, motivated solely by exhaustion, he is completely and utterly besotted. He attends twice more before returning to Munich, paying his admission in full both times. He writes a letter to Monsieur Lefebvre upon his return to thank him for giving his clock such a wondrous home, and for the experience of the circus itself. He goes on at length about the mastery of it, and says he gathered there is no rhyme or reason to its itinerary, but expresses his hope that it will come to Germany. Some weeks later he receives a letter from Monsieur Lefebvre's assistant, stating that Monsieur Lefebvre greatly appreciates Herr Thiessen's compliments, especially coming from such a talented artist. The letter speaks highly of the clock and mentions that should there be any kind of problem with it, Herr Thiessen will be contacted immediately. The letter mentions nothing of the current location of the circus or anything about it coming to Germany, much to Herr Thiessen's disappointment. He thinks about the circus frequently, often as he works, and begins to have an influence upon his work. Many of his new clocks are done in black and white, some with stripes, and many with scenes from the circus, tiny acrobats, miniature snow leopards, a fortune-teller who lays out minuscule tarot cards on the hour, though he fears he never does the circus justice in these clockwork tributes.